Hello, I am Rachel McLean, Community Relations Liaison with the Mather, a forward-thinking life plan community being developed in Tysons for those 62 and better. Our community is projected to open in 2023, and we are currently taking reservations. At the Mather, we recognize that art infuses our lives with vibrancy and meaning, and we are so honored to be able to support the McLean Project for the Arts Meet the Artist series. Enjoy the conversation.
Good afternoon, welcome. I'm Lori Carbonneau, Executive Director of McLean Project for the Arts, and we welcome you back if you've been here this week for this very special opportunity afforded by our virtual format of MPAartfest 2020. Today we thank Joe Wetzel, MPA Board Member, artist, and somebody who makes Artfest magic happen every year, for taking time to interview three of our artists. Today it's a treat to have time with Craig English, Jill Banks, and Khanh Lee. Joe, thank you for your time. To each of our artists today and all the rest of this week and next, we thank you for giving us the opportunity to have more time with you as we get to know you this virtual Artfest 2020.
Hi, and I'm Joe Wetzel. I'm with the McLean Project for the Arts, board member and founder and organizer of the Open Studio figure drawing program. Here talking to Craig English, joining us in our virtual MPA Artfest. You know, Craig, it's really interesting. I know you participated the MPA Artfest when we were outside for at least more than a few years.
Yes.
And now we're doing it inside, which has both advantages and maybe a few disadvantages. But the first thing that comes to my mind is we don't have to deal with mud. We don't have to deal with rain. The weather, it could be raining outside. And you and I, look, comfy, dry, you know, whatever you choose to look at this thing. What's also interesting, I think, about you is, you know, I'm more or less a native DCer. And when I think of the DC region, I think of the Washington Monument, I think of the National Gallery of Art, and I think of Joseph Craig English.
Wow.
I mean, you have been a part of the DC scene for as long as I can remember there being a scene.
Well, almost 50 years.
It's amazing. Tell us, how did you get, I know you've been making art since you were knee-high to a grasshopper, but how did you get started, and how did you end up doing prints? That was at an early age you started doing print screening.
It's interesting. I am a local guy like you. I graduated from W.T. Woodson in Fairfax, and we did screen printing in art class, and I just absolutely loved it. And I think I was the only one in class that really was excited about it. And I think I would have been really shocked if somebody said, you know, you're opening the door to a career path. But that's exactly what I was doing. I continued to silk screen all the way through high school. And then it really drove me to want to go to art school and learn more. And that's what I did. And
You went down to Richmond. Am I remembering that?
Yeah, you know, I went down to Richmond, and it was kind of interesting because nobody in my family had ever sought higher education. I was the first kid in the family to go to college, and my parents didn't have any clue how to guide me. And so my grandma...
I'm sure they were thrilled when you said, I'm going to go to college and become an artist.
Well, what happened was I said, I'd like to go to college and be an artist. And they said, oh, no, you can't do that because you can't make a living as an artist. And remember that phrase, you can't make a living as an artist, because it comes up in my career, periodically with people who are trying to be helpful. And
Still to this day, I'm sure.
oh, sure.
You must have people telling you, well, what do you really do?
Yeah. No, and so they said, well, why don't you go to, your grandmother lives in Richmond, and that would be a good place, if you're going away from home, you would at least have a safety net down there. Why don't you go to the University of Richmond? That seems like a nice place. And I said, well, gosh, let's go take a look. So we went down and took a look at it. Absolutely drop dead, beautiful campus. We went down in the spring, the azaleas and rhododendron were in bloom. And I said, well, this is great. Do they have any art here? He said, well, yeah, they do have a couple of art courses. But
we're hoping, Craig, that you change your mind once you get here, right?
Exactly. So I'm down there at the University of Richmond, and then I'm taking all these academics, and just a painting course. And I'm saying, I'm not going to bloom here. This flower has been planted in unfertile soil. I've got to get out of here. And my art teacher at the University of Richmond just happened to have a husband who was the chairman of the painting department at VCU, which when I was down there was RPI, Richmond Professional Institute. And she said, what are you doing here? You need to be downtown at the art college. And I said, well, that's what I'd like to do. She said, well, I'm calling my husband right now, and we're going to get you into the art college. And that's what they did. They allowed me to put together a portfolio, although the deadline had already passed, and I submitted an application and was accepted. And before I knew it, I was down at RPI and with all the hippies, and and it was a totally different world. And I absolutely loved it. And my folks were distraught, and and they basically said, well, we don't have any money to support this. This is how are we going to do this? So I got a job, and I started out at the Y teaching swimming and athletics to little kids down there, gymnastics to little kids. And I was working 20 hours a week at the Y and going to school, but all of my academics transferred. So I got to take nothing but straight art. And it was wonderful, except it was very hard for me to develop friendships, because I started out as a freshman and went to summer school, and the next year, instead of being with my class, I was already a sophomore.
Right.
And so I did 4 years in 3. And I got to meet a lot of new people every year. I had a whole different group that I was going to school with. But
now, when you were there, were you still doing, was your focus still on silk screens? Were you still in the printmaking world?
what was great about VCU was that they started you out in a foundation program. They wanted you to have an immersion in every type of art. So I was taking filmmaking, photography, painting, printmaking, sculpture, and then after 2 years, they asked me to declare an area of concentration. And so it's a very interesting story. I'll try to make it brief. But all the freshmen met in a theater, and each week we would be given a huge sales pitch by the chairman of a different department. Come to our department, because that's how they, support their salaries. Well, the painting and printmaking chairman came, and that was where I wanted to be, in painting and printmaking. He said, last year we had 60 seniors, and I've been in touch with every one of them. They're doing fantastic stuff. We've got 2 guys who are pumping gas at the Hess station. We got 3 girls that are waiting tables at Bob's Big Boy. We've got a couple guys that are clerks at the department store. Well, out of 60 kids that graduated, there was nobody making art. They were all plugged in. And here, this is the word from the chairman of the painting and printmaking department. You can't make a living as an artist. Well, I was devastated. I'd left the University of Richmond. I'd come to VCU to be an artist. And they're telling me I can't make a living as an artist. So the next week, as it happened, the chairman of the Communication Arts and Design Department came. He said, well, last year we had 60 seniors graduated, and 58 of them had jobs before they graduated, because our students are the most in demand up and down the East Coast. People want our students. Design studios, advertising agencies, record companies, publishing houses. We have people in some of the best, creative think tanks in the country. Hallmark Cards comes every year and hires 2 to 3 kids out of our, senior class. I said, wow, this is where I want to be. So I declared my, concentration in communication arts and design. And when I graduated, I came back home and I got a job in an advertising agency in Chevy Chase. And by that time, I was married. I married my college sweetheart, and she was a fashion design major, and she got a job right across the street from me at Saks Fifth Avenue.
Perfect.
So here we go. But we set up a studio in our apartment, and I started making prints. And I didn't know what I was going to do with them.
Craig, they must have been small prints. I mean, when you start talking, for those who don't know, doing an edition of silk screens, if it's got more than one color, even if it has one color, you've got drying racks where you stack your sheets of paper when you do the red, and then you do your blue, and then you do whatever you're doing.
When you do it on the cheap, and you don't have drying racks, you set up clotheslines.
Clothesline.
So what I did, I drilled holes in the wall, and I ran nylon clothesline across the ceiling, and I bought 400 clothespins, and we hung those prints up on from the ceiling, from the line all across the room. The room was full of, it looked like, somebody was doing their wash, but they were original silk screen prints hanging up to dry. And I got a big attic fan, and I put it in the window so that we didn't suffocate ourselves from the fumes.
Yes.
And we opened the doors and the windows and turned the fan on when we were printing, and I had a studio. It wasn't until I got a house and was able to build a real respectable studio that I had my first drying rack.
I was going to say, you've come a long way since the days of clothespins. Yeah. I mean, you've got quite the setup from the images that I've seen. And again, for those who don't know silk screening, it's Craig, you have to think a lot to get from the beginning to the end. I mean, from the conceptualization.
You have to be an engineer to do it right, because you have to carefully plan what you're going to do. I had developed a technique in which I always printed from light to dark. I would do a very, very careful pencil pattern, and then I would cut my stencils, and the stencil material I used would come on big rolls. Is a lacquer-based emulsion. It's coated on clear mylar, and what you would do, you would actually cut through the stencil material, leaving the mylar to support your stencil, and then you would adhere it to your screen using lacquer thinner.
Another fragrant, your neighbors must have loved you with the fumes of lacquer thinner going through the apartment building.
So you're understanding perfectly the reason that I needed to get out of there sooner than later.
You're going to be evicted.
Yeah.
Evicted because of fumes.
Yeah. So what happened was we were making prints in this little one-bedroom apartment in Chevy Chase, and I was working 40 hours a week at the advertising agency, and that first year I didn't know what I was going to do with my prints. How, I was just doing it to keep my sanity from working in the advertising agency, which was a real dog-eat-dog sort of situation. And I walked into the art supply store in Silver Spring, and there was a big poster, and it said, "Show and sell your work. Artist Unlimited sponsors shows all around the DC metro area." And I said, wow. So I called the lady, and she said, "Oh, we'd love to have you come and do a show at Wheaton Plaza." So I said, okay, how am I going to display my work? I didn't have a clue. And so I went to the lumber supply yard, and they had these damaged flush doors. And they were bashed in on one side, but they had one side that was good, and they were cheap. So I bought 6 flush doors, and I hinged them together. I threw them in the back of the old VW bus, and I spent some money to have some of my work framed. And I went down to Wheaton Plaza, and I had 10 prints, and I hung them up on the panels, and I sat there in a lawn chair all day. And people came by and they looked at my work, and they, yeah. So toward the end of the Sunday afternoon, there was about an hour left in the show, a lady came by and she said, I'd like to take that. And I remember the print was framed. It was $35 in the frame. And it was a 10-color silk screen print that I was very proud of. And all of a sudden the light came on. And I said, there's something here for me.
This is it. Well, we're really thrilled that you've been a part of MPA Art Fest. We're thrilled that you're sticking with us this year virtually. I like to think that it'll open up new avenues. As we said at the beginning of this, the viewer right now will have the opportunity to pause us and go look at your work online and come back to us in the middle of this conversation as if it never went away. So
right.
Hopefully this will be a great thing for you and the MPA. Craig, thank you again for being here with us today. And,
such a pleasure talking to you, Joe.
And we'll look forward to all kinds of success. I have with me this afternoon, Jill Banks, who's an MPA Art Fest participant, not just this virtual year, but Jill's been a participant at the MPA Art Fest for, I've lost track, Jill. How many years has it been? Forever. This is our 14th.
I think this is my 13th year.
Okay,
you're on your 14th.
You missed one. This is our 14th. We're doing it virtually this year, simply so that we can avoid the weather. Because as you know, Jill, we've had a few years where we've had mud seasons, and one year when we actually were chased away by a hurricane. So we decided this year to bring it all virtual, which means right now you're dry.
Yeah, that's true. And everyone viewing it is, which is exciting.
Right. There are advantages, and the folks who are watching this right now can pause us at any minute and go dash to your website to see what you've been doing and what you're doing right now, what's available. So there are all kinds of advantages to doing it this way. But Jill, tell us, I know who you are, but who's ever just popped on may not. You're pretty local. When I think of this area, I think of Jill. You're very active in many art societies. The list of awards that you've won goes on and on and on, not just in this area. Tell us more. Were you always a part of Washington?
I've been a part of Washington for a long time. So I went to UVA, and I married someone there that was a Virginian, and he ended up making me a Virginian.
They're worth things. There
Yeah,
were
there are.
you know.
There are. But been on the art scene for 17 years here in the DC area. Lived here longer, but it's definitely home. And I am like your art scene sort of expands as you go along. So as you said, I've won a lot of things locally and been a part of these art societies, but I'm also a signature member of Women Artists of the West and American Women Artists and the Washington Society of Landscape Painters. So one local and a lot of other things that are national. And
In your
I end up
studios,
participating in a bunch of things that connect me to artists all around the country.
your studios though are here in the DC area. You have two,
Yeah.
correct? I mean, one.
So yeah, a home studio, which is
Right.
where you're visiting with me now, and the other is in Great Falls, Virginia. And been up, I share a studio with 10 other artists there, and we've been doing that for quite some time. Kind of moved around a couple of different locations, but always very close to the village center. Right now, we're right down from the Old Brogue Irish pub. So
Then I'm sure there's something that's grand about that immersive experience. It must be, otherwise you would just be happily staying entirely at your home.
yes. So I actually don't like being alone. So it's fun visiting with you today. And then during this pandemic or something else, I'm like on Zoom. I'm teaching my classes on Zoom. And I love the company of other people. So it's inspiring to me for my art, but just as my just general enjoyment of life all stems with not being in the woods all by myself. So.
I'm sure you have to have a few minutes quietly in the woods to paint, to actually do the work that you're thinking of. But
I don't know. So I'm not painting in the woods. I'll paint in a urban environment. I mean, that's more common for me, and I love all the interaction. I mean, I not constant and not right here, but somewhere nearby, and then wandering in and out of the scenes and just becoming a part of the painting process for me.
well,
So
you actually become part of the scene. I know you're an active participant in many plein air festivals, and for people
right,
who
right.
don't know, a plein air festival, a plein air is just painting outside, basically, which
Right.
Puts you as an artist right in the middle of things. You have no walls, no shields, nothing to separate you from the innocent passerby who pauses
Yeah.
to make comments on what you're doing.
That's true. So I've
Uh,
had a couple of things that number one is I take a lot of personal painting trips. I mean, I love to travel and to discover something new, and that's really exciting. I've been in these plein air competitions, and there are times during those competitions too that you're timed. Like you
Right.
have an hour and a half to create this painting, or maybe 2 hours, and then I'll have somebody come and try to ask me questions, and that's what my husband's for. You know, it's just like, okay, you have to do this. Yeah, it's like entertain them or answer the questions. He knows the answers to everything, but just to make it so that it's like, otherwise I don't care. Like I don't want to have. It's not going to be the most intelligent conversation that I have with them, but I love that people are involved in it. They get excited, so it's a lot of fun.
And you spend a lot of time teaching as well, so there's more to that interactive experience.
Right. So I think my favorite things are connecting with people. So whether it's collectors or my students, and just seeing somebody get immersed in this thing that I love so much, which, I mean, art, I think, is the best thing for everybody. So it's like,
Of course.
yeah, I mean, one of the big things as far as a teacher is concerned is I'm teaching people how to see. And that I remember somebody saying that to me when I was learning myself and thinking, well, that's kind of a dumb statement. But it is that I was like, I'll be around artists and like, look at the colors on that wall. You know, I mean, just there is a different perception of the world around you when you're an artist, and you're examining it. You're paying so much attention to it.
It ignites a whole different part of your brain.
Yeah, it does.
That otherwise might not have been lit up.
Yes, it's very well lit up. But the students are great. I actually just finished finish up classes and start new ones, but they learn so much, and they started teaching on Zoom because of not doing the close contact, and I'm a very close contact kind of person, so I have to have the Zoom to keep me away. But it's people were reluctant to do that at first, but then it's just such a joy to see faces and hear laughter and see what other people are doing in their own homes, and I don't know, kind of sharing that experience with people. It's been great.
And you find that they're learning along the same paths of excitement, if you will?
I think they're learning better. So
Really?
that's that. It'll be interesting to go from that to back to in-person classes. I mean, I've had students that have been, I had 3 students in California. I have students from kind of all over the country, as well as my local students that have been with me for a long time. But there are just so many things that you can do. And that's kind of like with the people shopping here or looking at MPAartfest, is that you do have the opportunity to go to a website, see something, and I've been able to work with them in exactly the same way, or very similar, in terms of that I can be right there at their easel, watching them develop painting, annotate, so I use the annotation tools to be able to show them what I'm talking about, point out different area. Can bring up examples of other people's work, so we're on a topic. Because I'm always a very messy desktop. I have to make sure that I share the right thing. So
you're learning all kinds of things too.
I am. Yeah, that's not so easy.
I know.
But
it's fun. It's fun, isn't it? It's challenging, but it's fun.
It is. But you wrap your head around something different. So
you work mostly in oils, right?
Yeah, I work almost completely in oils.
I don't see a lot of that. It must take perseverance. I don't know how else to describe it.
No, it's the best thing in the world. So, I know that that's a perception that people have in terms of, okay, well, it takes forever to dry, or it does such and such. So almost all of my work is immediate. I'm working wet into wet. And I love that, because then I can adjust edges, I can make changes, I can scrape something out. I mean, I would never do glazing techniques and a little at a time.
You have to stop for a second and explain to those who just popped in what wet into wet means.
Okay, so oil paints, the pigment is suspended in oil, and while I'm painting, I could paint all day, and I'm painting, 6 hours, 8 hours, or something else. All of the paint that I'm putting on the surface is wet. So if I was working in acrylics, it's all dried up, and I can immediately go over it with another color. I can immediately go over any of those colors, but it just means they're right next to one another. I may need to do a demo for my little but it's instead of letting it dry. So one of the things that I teach my students is how to keep really clean, beautiful colors, even though you have one color next to another or something else. And so it's using the brush strokes. I go through 1 million paper towels, but just kind of cleaning off my brush and then applying the next color.
For those who might be looking behind you and seeing some things with color that you refer to, I don't know that many people appreciate just how easily and quickly all of those marvelous colors that are behind you can turn into a blob of mud.
They can. They can, but I've been practicing for a while, so I won't let that happen.
No, I'm just
And like there's solutions to everything. So it's just like, and then we were talking about the plein air. That was something that you are out there painting something that's changing constantly. So the light's changing and people are moving around and just the weather changes, the clouds come out. I mean, just all sorts of things are changing. And when I first started doing that, where it wasn't in a studio environment and I wasn't controlling that, I had a lot of mud. And it's like not have the brilliant sense of light and shadow. And so it's just like, it just have to keep coming up with new ways to stop that from happening. So like thinking through what you want to have happen and changing around your process so that doesn't happen anymore. I remember my husband and I looking at them thinking, they're not that nice, you know. Plein air paintings just aren't that nice because there's especially with oils, because there was a lot of mud, but you don't have that anymore. So
you're having to come up with a solution every second.
You actually, yes, you do. Yes. So whether it's something's breaking in the field or anything else, but I've gotten really good at figuring out some way around it.
And it shows.
Yeah.
I've never seen a dud of yours. So
You never what?
I've never seen a dud. A dud, you know.
I wouldn't bring them to the show. Almost everybody that paints plein air talks about, like, at the beginning, you might have one good one out of 10. You know, I mean, and it's like bringing that ratio down. And at the beginning, you would be very lucky to have one good one out of 10. I really enjoy the process. I love painting. Like, I don't care that sooner or later I want to have some good paintings, you know. But like, I'm in the middle of it. I don't care.
It's a process.
I'm enjoying what I'm doing, and it no matter what happens, it was a good experience that was out there. One of the things that I've noticed, just like, it used to be really excruciating to pick a scene, like to find the one that you want to paint, the one that you connect with. And sooner or later, I realized that when you first get there to this one, there has to be some reason that you picked it. But when I first set up, it's not as pretty as it ends up getting. Like that scene. Okay, so it's like I have to have faith that there's gonna, like, the special lights that is gonna come in there at a certain hour, or something's gonna wander in the scene and it's gonna make it whole. But when I start, it might be mid-afternoon, okay, like, or maybe 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock or something else. And I've been painting I'm unusual as far as a plein air painter. Some are really completing and painting much faster than I will do, but I will get set up for that beautiful light or that person I wander in. So I'm painting the buildings or the like structures and things like that, and I'm waiting for it. I'm building up to that point.
It's creativity. I mean, you're creating what may not be there, Jill, whether you
know, in most cases, it's wonderful things happen. It's just like they don't all happen at the same time, and they don't happen throughout the whole one, but you'll like look up and I was like, oh, that's what I need to capture.
Well, Jill, armed with all of this information and insight, I'm hoping that while we've been talking, who's ever been watching has stopped once or twice and gone to your studio, either the virtual studio that is a part of MPAartfest, or to your own website, or somehow been enriched by what it is that you're offering, and come back to join us again in time for us to say goodbye to one another, because this is all timed and my time is up. So
Well, it's been fun talking with you.
it's fun always, Jill. Thank you again so much for being a part of MPA Art Fest, and we look forward to you being a part of it for many more years to come. Inside or out, virtually.
I'll
or
be
real.
there. I'll be
Okay,
there.
counting on it.
Thanks so
Okay.
much.
Thank you.
Bye.
I have with us Conley, who's an MPA Art Fest participant. Con, is this your first year at the MPA Art Fest? I've lost track. We've been doing it for 14 years. This is our 14th year, I should say.
Yes, this is actually my first year. I've really oftentimes I try to be working around DC, but oftentimes with what's happening this year with COVID and everything, I thought it would be best if I sort of spread myself not only in DC, but try to extend myself into Virginia and Maryland as well, and into Baltimore, so that it allowed me a greater exposure to different types of audience.
Well, we knew that, and that's exactly why we went virtual this year, is so that you didn't have to drag yourself physically out to what could be sometimes muddy, windy. We've had years when the event has been moved by a couple of weeks because of a hurricane. So we're sparing you and me and all of those who are watching us now from all of that weather, and giving them an opportunity to see your work. I know you're of the DC area, and your schooling was also in Virginia. Am I misremembering that?
No, my schooling is actually, I came to DC in 2008. I did my master's degree in Syracuse University.
Okay.
Before that, I was in Southern Illinois, Edwardsville, doing printmaking as sort of like my major. But then when I did my graduate at Syracuse, I focused mainly on studio arts. And so a lot of my process currently right now is from that transitional moment where I moved beyond just printmaking, but more like mixed media art.
And so I can see absolutely no logic in how you ended up in DC. What brought you to DC? Not that, I mean, we're happy that you're here, but there's no logical progression that I can see.
You're right. Because mainly I was a drifter for most of the time. As a refugees and immigrant here to the United States after the Vietnam War, my family and I became refugees in the 80s, and we lived in Thailand, coming to the United States, to St. Louis, Missouri in the Midwest in early or late 80s, early 90s. And from that settlement that we have there, oftentimes I had to take care of my family. And so from the age of probably 9 till 24, 25, my primary focus was staying close to my family and taking care of them. And after that, after I was 25, my sister told me, I can take care of mom and dad. You just go and do what you need to do with yourself. And so from there, I traveled to Beijing, China. I teach as assistant professor for foundations for a couple of years. And then I went to Vietnam and taught a couple of semesters. And then I came back to Syracuse. I thought, well, after a while, I need to be really focused, honing in into my practice as an artist. And so I left Vietnam probably, I would say around 98, 99, then coming back to the States to do my master's degree at Syracuse University. After I finished my master's degree, there was a university down here at American University because Don was part of it, and I have friends who knew Don from Chautauqua, and you know, like they keep trying to push me, like go to DC. I have a couple of friends down there, and then a couple of my friends were interning at the National Gallery, and so they were living there, and so I figured after graduate school, I didn't have much things to do, so I sort of migrate myself from Syracuse, New York, down to DC. And ever since 2008, it sort of became my home base. And oftentimes, I probably around 2010, I tell people that sort of I'm based in DC. And so I would probably say by 2010, I made DC sort of my home as an artist.
So you've stopped drifting. Yay.
Oh, life as a drifter. So yeah.
But you touch on your family's immigrant status, which obviously, well, I'm hoping that by now maybe if somebody has popped over to either your website or our own MPAartfest studio that we've set up for you to actually have a look at your work. But there's no escaping the fact that your work is heavily influenced by your drifting, by the immigrant status. Some of your the photogravures, which are lovely and time sensitive for those of us old enough to remember images from the Vietnam War era, that's certainly loaded with them. And your, what do you call? How do you refer to your work that's not quite painting, assemblage, the mixed media work?
I would normally call it collage.
Okay.
It is collage based because most of the time, for me, the idea is to sort of construct sort of a new level of way of looking at oneself. Because oftentimes I'm interested in, well, since studying painting and looking at the history of painting, oftentimes sort of these portraiture or commissioned portraiture back in the old day, they were as a way to sort of construct their identity. But for me, living in between world, neither a Vietnamese or neither American, oftentimes I have sort of like two doors. Some like in one side of the door, when I'm with all my families who are Vietnamese, I don't feel I'm Vietnamese enough, or I felt like they don't treat me as Vietnamese. While I'm with my colleagues and friends who are American, I felt like I'm not American enough. And so there's really no sense of sort of groundedness. And so for me, photography was important because the idea of photography is like this inherent truth in photography. This is what it is, and this is what it will be. And so there's an idea of permanency in there. But for me to construct photography and to remove it from this notions of permanency and being able to drift back and forth between real and unreal and construct an unreal based on real images, it's sort of adhere to what my identity go through, moving through those door between being not a Vietnamese and not an American, and a hybrid of Vietnamese American that I can only live that in between space.
Well,
And
I think your work clearly conveys that. I mean, it's impossible to look at your pieces and not, in the course of 2 seconds, feel both of those doors, feel both of those sides pulling at you. And I have to tell you that what you're referring to as your collages really come off very, very painterly, and that's meant as the highest compliment that I can think of. It's just amazing the things that you do with beads and sort of, what do you call them, craft materials. Really?
Well, like for me, oftentimes when people ask me, they don't know where to categorize me myself also. But I like to often call I'm the bedazzle, because I do a lot, because a lot of this is I'm remembering to like weekends in the late 80s and early 90s when I was young watching cartoon. Cartoon is generally how I sort of learn English, because oftentimes the language is very, it's the structure and the fundamental of English is very difficult for me to grasp. But if there's a visual image, it's easier for me to grasp. But you have to simplify the image for me as a child, and cartoon becomes sort of like a very keen way for me to access communications and understanding in American culture, because it's in its sort of like simplified way. And for me, that's what I'm drawn to. And when you talk about, uh, I'm so gracious of your comment about it's painterly. I love painting, but whenever I get to a painting, I feel like, oh, there's so many things I want to do, and there's so many process. There's 100 years of painting history and techniques that I cannot really dwell into. But if I utilize glitters, um, metallic paint, my palettes become limited. And when things are limited, as a refugees or an immigrant, we get creative.
You
When
can
things
focus.
are exactly, it's sort of tunnel. It sort of
Right.
forces us to like see things like an escape point. And so for me, when my palettes become limited and my technique is limited, I can see possibilities in my process and in my technique self. And so,
Con, I have to ask, side note. So
yeah.
you said how important it was to learn a language through cartoons.
Yeah.
And so did you also learn to do sound effects?
Yes, I like pew,
Yes, exactly.
in my own time. Well, my friends like see me random whenever I go into a gallery or a museum. There's a certain quietness people need to do, but for me that's anxiety, and so beep beep beep. So I make
Sound
random
effects.
sound. Yeah, I make random sound at random time, and all my friends sort of like knew this. And like even in gallery when we're there looking at art, but then everyone's quiet, focused. But then here I'm mumbling or making random sound effect, because the fact that it's sort of like it's another way for me to relate to visual. I believe, but yeah, I do. It's very random.
We can't take ourselves too seriously. You know? It's important to keep it light. So what, working with, as you call it, the bedazzled effect, what are you working on right now that you feel might be the next step? Is it bigger bedazzles? Is it?
Uh, well, like for me, with COVID and everything that's happening, I think a lot about those who are either still locked up or being forced. Because for a time, I myself live in refugee camps for 8 months, and also my wife, who lived for 8 years in a Hong Kong refugee camps. And so for us, we often, the first thing we think about is those who are still being affected, whether they're at our borders and they're in limbos. And so oftentimes I think about weight and heaviness. And so right now I've been doing like cutting of my shapes, of stenciling, of image, of I take the pictures of my aunt and uncle, of them standing on the beach, in a refugee camp, showing that they're waiting to get approved to leave Malaysia so that they can come to the United States. And so from that figure of their image, I began cutting sort of beautiful flowers, intricate patterns of them in that shapes and removing them. So, and I want to sort of, my work will no longer be on canvas or a wooden backing, but rather it's gonna hang itself based on paper, because I'm thinking about weight and heaviness of how much individual lives are worth when we put them through limbo, and how gravity sort of pull it down. And all, as I put more glitters and patternings onto it, the heaviness of the paper weighing it down. And so a lot of my work right now is asking about the structure of paper and how it can hang in the air physically. And so that's what I've been currently sort of trying to work my way out, because as you can see, a lot of my painting, the pattern in the background, all those patterning looks like wire fences.
Right.
You know, like from afar, it looks like beautiful pattern constructed. But if you look at in its simplest form and in its abstract form, it's like wire fences. But now, how can I construct those wire fences onto the body of families such as my aunts and uncle, myself, who were in refugee camps, waiting in limbo as we get approved to come to either to the United States or to the country that they're requesting. And so for me, that heaviness, or that I'm curious about it. And so I'm slowly moving my work out of the canvas, out of the board, and slowly letting it hang using gravity.
I can't wait to see that. I can't wait to see that. And so that would be, you know, the COVID has affected all of us, and many of us in some really unfortunate ways, but there's some good that's come of it if your work proves to come to some fruition from it. Khanh, this has been fascinating. I'm so thankful that you could join us at the MPA Artfest this year. Hopefully you'll be able to do it next year when we're outside. And hopefully we won't have a hurricane. But in the meantime, I'm hoping that people will, again, hit pause here and go visit your website or our studio here. And I wish you all great success. And thank you again for being a part of this.
Before we go, I would like to say thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity and a platform. Oftentimes, my work, it doesn't have sort of institutional or a place where it can sort of present and sort of like reflect. And with what's happening at our borders, not only at our borders, but borders across Europe and other countries, lives are being in limbo. And oftentimes with what's going on with COVID, we oftentimes sort of think only about what's with us and what's happening around us, but rather oftentimes those who are in need are in great neglect. And hopefully, but with opportunity to show my work, talk about immigrants and refugees, it gives me a platform. And I'm so thankful for the opportunity so that I can sort of raise some kind of awareness to it, because oftentimes I feel, even though I'm no longer a refugee, but once you're a refugee, you always know its experience, and it will, and whatever you do, you sort of always refer to it. And so thank you and I'm very thankful for the opportunities.
Our pleasure. We wish you great success. Thank you again, Khanh.
Thank you, Joe.